Call me Tom Kirkman, because today we're talking about HUD. Let's get to work.
Here we go.
What's up, people? MisterToolbox here with another Amazon Lumberyard video. We're not strictly talking about HUD, but we are talking about the UI system and canvases. We'll first dive into the editor itself, take a look at that, navigate around, look at properties, things like that. Then we'll move over and dive into some of the samples in the feature tests project. I've got the samples project open here. Doesn't really matter which project you're in. I'm going to go ahead and create a new level. Doesn't matter what any of this is. We just want to take a look at that editor. Let's load this up. And then, as you expect, we will find the UI editor in View, Open View Pane, UI Editor. We've got a lot of usual suspects here. Menu bar up across the top, followed by a toolbar below it. Over on the left, we've got a hierarchy, which will hold the entities we place in this canvas. Over on the right, we've got properties. Right now, it's the property of the canvas itself. And then down at the bottom, we've got the animation editor. We'll leave that off for now, but we will be talking about it later. Looking back at the toolbar, we've got a big new button. That's where you create a new canvas. Next to that, you've got transform. It's set to local coordinate system by default. Next to that, we have a snap to grid, which is oddly disabled by default. That'll let you snap your items, your entities down here to a grid pattern. I think it's based on 10 units by default. Yeah, here it is over on the right-hand side in the properties. So that'll snap to units of 10. Next to that, we've got the canvas size itself. As you can see from the tooltip, it's used to determine the scaling if you scale the UI to devices. It's definitely worth testing out. We'll be looking at that in a little bit. But here's where you set the actual default resolution for the canvas with which you're going to work. Next to that, we've got the zoom. I'm at 95% right now. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the usual mouse click, move, rotate, and scale widgets. If you're developing for PC gaming, you're going to run into a lot of people using a lot of different resolutions. That's where this canvas size comes in. So set it to something sensible. It's set to 720 by default. That's probably fine. I'm going to switch mine to 1080 just for giggles. You'll see the zoom changed because the viewport size didn't really change. If we click out here in the viewport, we can use our mouse to scale in and out. It's just moving the mouse wheel back and forth, so there's 100%. If you go way too far in, you want to get back to normal, just press Control and 0. That'll fit it to the screen, or Control and 1, which will zoom it back to 100%. So Control 0 to fit it to screen, that's the default. That's the easiest way to get back to where you were. If we're zoomed in at, say, 100% or even 280%, you want to move around. You would think control dragging will do it. No, that's going to marquee select. So what you want to do is middle mouse and drag to pan around, or you can hold space on the keyboard and then left click and drag. That'll pan you around your UI. It's worth noting wherever you see the little window icon and the X, you can actually grab these panels and tear them off. So you could float off the hierarchy if you wanted to, rearrange this to suit your needs. I like it where it is, so I'm going to keep mine at the default. Let's talk quickly about the canvas properties. You'll see what is set as default. I haven't changed any of this. We've got pixel alignment. What that's going to do is kind of round up or down the locations of the entities you place on the canvas so that they don't fall between pixels. That'll make textures and fonts and stuff look sharper. Render to texture, you're going to use that when you want to render this canvas out to a texture. We'll use that when we're placing these canvases in game, which we'll talk about in a bit. Below that, we've got handle positional that defaults to on, and that's going to handle input from the keyboard, the mouse, from touchscreen, stuff like that. If you've got a non-interactive canvas, you can disable that safely, otherwise leave it on. Below it, we've got handle navigation, also on by default. What that's going to do is allow the arrow keys and enter to interact with the items, the entities that we place on this canvas. Below navigation, we've got first focus element. It's set to none right now because I have no entities, but what that would do is if the canvas detected no mouse input, it's got to select one of the entities on the canvas to be the one that has the keyboard focus when it launches. So then you could use your keyboard to navigate through the other entities there. If it detects mouse input, it doesn't do anything. Alright, I just had a bit of an adventure there. If you ever get to a point where Lumberyard spawns a window that's too big for your screen, where you can't see the title bar, see the X, can't get out of it, if you hold Alt and press space, you'll see this menu here. You can press M then, and then use your keyboard to move it around. That can really save your bacon if you can't see the menu bar up at the top. Let's take a look at the hierarchy panel next. For that to make any sense, we're going to need a couple of entities in our canvas. So I'll click the big new button. We'll use some prefabs just to save time. I'm going to drop a button right there. And then I'll also drop a text just so we have multiple things out here. First things first, let's click this text over in the hierarchy. I'm going to press 2 or just click this to move mode, and I'm just going to move it up a bit so it's not sitting right on top of the button. So now we've got our two entities out here on our canvas. You'll see we have eye icons and we have locks kind of scattered about here. If I've got nothing selected in the hierarchy and I press the eye, it's going to make everything vanish. If I click it again, it'll all come back. By the same token, if I select text, for instance, and I click the eye next to it, it'll go away. The button itself will stay because the eyes are still there. We can click that back in. Then if we deselect everything here in the hierarchy and we press the lock, it's going to put a lock on everything. And what that means is that I can't select any of those items. So they are kind of frozen, locked in place. We can untick that, and then if we marquee select, we'll get all that stuff. So as you build your canvases, you get them kind of more and more complex. Once you kind of have something where you want it bolted down, if you tick that lock next to it, it'll save you some trouble when you're trying to move other stuff around. As you may have noticed when we selected an item out here, or if we select it here in the hierarchy, the properties panel changes to show us the properties of the entity itself. No longer do we see the canvas properties, but this is all stuff that pertains to the element we've got selected. So let's talk about that. You've got your traditional transform stuff like the rotation, the scale, the pivot points, all that. One nice bit is that an anchor is selected by default when you place something into the canvas. Anchors are pretty important when we talk about UI scaling. What the anchors do is they break the canvas out into percentages, basically a grid of percentages, starting at 0 up in the top left corner. It works its way to 100 over on the right-hand side, and 100 down at the bottom as well. So when we're thinking about scaling this UI, the pixel might change, the actual pixel positioning, but the percentage at which it kind of falls along the spectrum won't change. The wording's kind of hard to get your head around, but I want to talk about the difference between anchors that are together and anchors that are split. So what they say is that if your left and your right, for instance, are the same, then when you preview this or when you display this UI at a different resolution, the size of this element, for instance, our string here, is absolute. The anchors are together because those two are equal. That means that if I display this at 4 times this resolution, that string will stay the same size. It's not going to stretch to fill the extra screen real estate. If I want the item, the element, to scale along with the scaling of the UI, what I need to do is make sure that the opposite sides, the left and the right, for instance, are different values. That means the anchors are split. And if I click one of these and change it, you'll kind of see what happens. So this element is kind of stretching out this way. And then as I change the resolution on this, the string element itself will resize naturally with the UI to fill up the screen real estate. And it's going to do that resizing as a fixed percentage of its parent, in this case the canvas as a whole. So it'll always be a fixed percentage of the resolution of the canvas. That word soup may be easier to visualize if we see this in practice. So let's go ahead and preview this. We've got split anchors on the string, and then we've got anchors that are together on this button. So if we go into preview mode, We'll see my string over here. It's kind of left offset. Then we've got the button directly in the center. Let's change the preview canvas size to 8x6. We'll see that the button didn't move because it's still kind of fixed between the edges, but my string actually, the bounding box around that entity resized itself. So let's crank that way up. And we'll see that my string is actually further to the left of button than it was at our default, which was 1080, I believe. I want to take a look at action log while we're here, but it's not on the screen. So what I'm going to do is close up the animation editor. We're not going to need that for now. And I'll come up to the menu bar and I'll right click and I'll tick action log. So that's down there. So now that it's on screen, let's go ahead and select the button. Be careful when you're selecting things out in the canvas. You'll probably end up selecting the text instead of the button itself. You can be really careful and select kind of the outside, or just tick it in the hierarchy here. What I want to do is over in the properties panel, scroll down so I see actions. I'm going to set a couple of these. So the names don't mean much now, but let me just type some in. Hover start, hover end, pressed, released, and click. Now that we've got those banged in, what we should see is that when we click that button in preview, it should log out to the action log. So let's give it a crack. Head on up to preview, preview. As you see, I hovered over that button. We've got a hover start from element button. If I click it, you've got pressed, released, and click that all happened. So that is working great. Once you start building more complex canvases, that can really kind of help out when you're trying to make sure that the clicks and all of that stuff that you need to do to interact with the canvas is actually producing the action that you want it to, because you'll need those names when we start wiring this up to Flowgraph or to our Lua scripts. So let's save this masterpiece of engineering off. I'm going to click save and save canvas as, and we will call this awesome underscore canvas. And we'll save it in UI canvases in the samples project. That's perfect. And I'm going to close up the UI editor. What I want to do is show off how to get this working in our level. So there's actually a number of ways to do that. I'm going to focus on the component entity system because it is the future. So first things first, I'm going to need the entity inspector for what I've got going on here. So let me pop that open. Cool beans. And now we're ready to go. So looking out at our viewport, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create new component entity. Now we've got an empty entity out here. I'm going to then find it in the entity outliner. Right click it there. Come down to Flowgraph and I'm going to click add. We'll give it the same name, awesome, we'll call this awesome UI, I guess, and click OK. And here is our Flowgraph window. As you can see, it's giving me the same sort of trouble, so I'm going to Alt space, press the M key, and then shift it down so I can see the darn thing. There we go, now we can resize it and jam it where I didn't want it. There we go, much better. I'm going to shove the Flowgraph window out of the way. And then over here in the Entity Inspector, what I need to do is to add a component, come down to UI, and I need to add a UI Canvas Asset Ref. There we go. From here we can select the canvas. What we do is click the triple dots to the right of there, and then I saved this guy in UI, canvases, awesome canvas.UI canvas. Select that, we'll hit open. And for giggles, we'll set this to load automatically. That's generally all we need to get this canvas to load when the game starts. We can test it out by clicking out in the viewport and then pressing Ctrl G. You'll see that we've got our canvas loaded on screen. My mouse isn't rendering, so you can see the hover state changing on that button, but I'm just doing that kind of out of blind luck. So let me escape out of there. If I untick this load automatically, click back in the viewport and press Ctrl G, you'll see that canvas doesn't load. So that load automatically causes that canvas to render immediately when the game starts. Something to keep in mind. If you're more comfortable with using FlowGraph to load the UI canvas, or you don't want it to load immediately when the component entity spawns, we can do that with FlowGraph as well. So I have the FlowGraph editor open. I'm editing the FlowGraph that's attached to that component entity. Let's add a node for game start. This will essentially end up with the same functionality, but you could replace this game start event with any other event that you wanted to. And then we're going to add another node. It's an UIE canvas load into entity. Drop that out here. Connect the output of game start into activate. We'll right click, choose entity, and we will do assign selected entity. Sorry, no we won't. We will do assign graph entity. And that should do it. Let me slide this out of the way. You'll see we still have load automatically unchecked, so that shouldn't be loading from there. And if we click out in the viewport and press Ctrl G, there's our UI. So like I said, this is replicating the same sort of functionality, but this could be anything. Say a trigger volume that ends a level that presents a UI, something like that. It's important to note in the node list, you'll see there's a UI and a UIE, and they look pretty much identical. The documentation says that the UIE node set actually supersedes UI, so in all cases, select the UIE node entity and ignore the UI nodes. I know we haven't talked at all about the scary world of scripting yet here on this channel. We will get to it, I promise. But it's worth pointing out that you can also load UI canvases via Lua scripts. Let's go through it real quick. Here I've got a Windows Explorer open to my project folder. What I'm going to do is create a new text document. And we'll just call it new text document right now because I'm going to use Notepad and save it anew. So let's open that guy up. Let's paste this code in here. We'll talk about it for a sec. Basically, all we're doing here is declaring a function called loadCanvas that is going to load the canvas. Yes, I stole this right out of the docs. I am going to take this menu.uiCanvas and name it awesome_canvas.uiCanvas to match our file. So it's just going to call load canvas on that guy when this script is invoked. So we will file save as. We'll save this not as a .txt but rather as we'll call it load canvas.lua. We'll save it right in the root of this samples project. Close it up. Please do use an editor that's not Notepad when you're doing these things. I'm just doing that kind of for an example here. But here's our new file. Now we've got that file set to look in the root of the project right now for our UI canvas. So let's go ahead and grab a copy of this guy. And we'll dump it down here too, just to keep things simple on ourselves. So there's awesome canvas. There's our load canvas.lua. Windows Explorer can go away. And what we'll do is we'll attach that script to our component entity, which means we don't need our UI canvas asset ref anymore. What we need instead is to click add component, head down to scripting, Lua script. There it is. So here we've got the same sort of deal. We can browse for our script by clicking the triple dots. We'll do that. We will head up a couple of directories and find loadcanvas.lua. Open, and there we go. Well, Lumberyard just crashed on me, so I had to redo that last bit of Lua work, but I wanted to jump back into FlowGraph and just verify that I don't have any flow graphs with the canvas still attached to it. So now that I've done that, I can close up the FlowGraph window. We've got our load canvas bound to the Lua script. We're ready to test. So let's click out in the viewport. We'll press Ctrl G. And hey, there is our canvas. Cool, so it worked. That's going to wrap up our first look at the UI system and canvases. In the next time, it'll probably be 2 more parts that we'll get through this stuff. I still do want to take a look at those feature samples. The feature test project is really full of good samples to get you familiar with UI and with some of the particle effects, stuff like that. So we'll dive into some of those samples and see what we can learn from them there. And then on from there, we'll build a couple of canvases that aren't terrible. And we'll take a look at how you use the UI system on objects in the game world. That's a new feature of 1.6 and a really cool one. And maybe we'll put together sort of a rudimentary HUD and show it updating as the game is in motion. So that's what we've got to look forward to. If you've got any questions, comments, feedback, any of that, drop it in the comments below. I'm going to make another plug for the Lumberyard Community Slack channel. We've got some good conversation going on in there. I'd hope to see a couple more of you join us, so I'll drop a link to that in the description below. And as always, do not forget to subscribe. Bye.